first thing I noticed about St. Brigid's Hospital was the smell, that sharp, metallic dampness that lingers in buildings that shouldn't still be standing. The place sat on the edge of the Vermont wilderness, a few miles outside a town so small it didn't even have a gas station. The trees came right up to the walls, their roots pushing through cracked pavement and broken stone. When the wind moved through them, it sounded almost like breathing. They sent me there to check the structural integrity before a development firm turned the site into luxury apartments. I was supposed to look at walls, foundations, load-bearing beams, nothing supernatural, just numbers and physics. There were 5 of us. Ria, the project architect, sharp and skeptical. Diego, the mason, loud, always chewing gum. Marla, the electrician, quiet but easily spooked. Callum, our site manager, who carried himself like he'd rather be anywhere else. And me, Thomas Vance, engineer, the one who was supposed to keep everyone calm when the old pipes groaned or the lights flickered. The locals had warned us about the place. "Don't go pockin' around the west wing," one of them told me at the diner. That's where it started. When I asked what it was, he just shrugged. "You'll hear it." At first, it was just another decaying building. The west corridor was sealed off with plywood and police tape that had long since turned brittle. The walls were blackened from the 1968 fire, the floor soft underfoot. When you breathed in, the air stung your nose with mold and ash. We spent most of that first day taking measurements, logging damage, and pretending not to notice the occasional noise, a shuffle in the vents, a faint click somewhere behind the walls. It wasn't until late afternoon that we found the door. It was Diego who spotted it. He was tracing the lines of an old pipe along the basement wall when he stopped and tapped the bricks with his hammer. The sound changed, hollow. We pried off a panel and uncovered a heavy metal hatch, round at the edges with a single bolt sealing it shut. There was no mention of it on any blueprint Ria had. No mark, no outline, just empty space where a wall should have been. We almost left it, then Marla noticed a faint light laking through the seam. So we opened it. The air that came out was cold, colder than the rest of the building, almost freezing. The steps beneath descended into a small chamber lined from floor to ceiling with mirrors. Every surface reflected the same image again and again until the light became dizzying. A single chair sat under a low-hanging bulb, the only thing in the room not covered in dust. The bulb was on. I remember asking the obvious question, where is the power coming from? Marla checked the nearest conduit, dead, no current, the wires had been cut years ago. Still, the bulb glowed faintly, flickering as if reacting to our breathing. Diego laughed to break the tension. "Looks like a movie set," he said. "Maybe they treated patients here." Ria shook her head. "There's no record of this room," she murmured, running her hand along the mirrored wall. "It's not even part of the original foundation." She meant it literally. The dimensions didn't match. The space we were standing in shouldn't have existed. I raised my flashlight and caught my own reflection, but the longer I stared, the more wrong it seemed. The reflections didn't line up perfectly. They lagged, just barely. A flicker, like watching yourself through an old VHS with a half-second delay. When I blinked, my reflection didn't. We left without saying much. Ria sealed the hatch and made a note to check it again later with the property managers. But as we walked back toward the main hallway, I noticed something strange on my wrist, a faint smudge, like condensation. It wasn't from sweat. It was cold. That night, Diego didn't show up for dinner. Callum joked he'd gone into town for beer, but Ria looked uneasy. His tools were still on site, his truck still in the lot. We searched the building with flashlights, shouting his name until our voices echoed down the empty halls. When we finally reached the basement, the air was freezing again. The hatch we'd sealed was standing slightly open. And inside the mirror room, the light bulb was still on. We told ourselves Diego had walked off the job. That's what people do when they can't explain something. They reach for the nearest ordinary lie and hold it close until it feels true. The sheriff's deputy who came out 2 days later didn't even bother taking notes. "He'll turn up," he said. "People get spooked in these places. Woods'll do that to you." But the woods didn't leave footprints. The woods didn't open sealed hatches. We tried to keep working. Marla checked the wiring, Callum cataloged the fire damage. Ria and I combed through the old administrative offices for any record of the mirror room. We found only a half-burned file marked Dr. R. Hale, Cognitive Reflections. Most of the pages were unreadable, but one line was still visible near the bottom of a progress report. Subject reports echo preceding speech by 0.8 seconds. Temporal dissonance sustained for 43 hours before collapse. Ria didn't like the word collapse. She said it too softly, like if she spoke it any louder it might happen again. We kept finding more of Hale's notes tucked inside drawers and cabinets, formulas, diagrams of human heads surrounded by concentric circles, and a drawing of the mirror room itself. The sketch was almost perfect, down to the angle of the bulb, except that Hale had drawn 6 chairs instead of 1. In the far corner of the basement storage room, behind a stack of cracked filing boxes, we found a dusty reel-to-reel tape recorder. Ria plugged it into the generator and threaded the tape marked Session 3, Patient 12. The reel hissed to life, then a man's voice filled the air, calm and professional. Hale, state your name. Patient muffled, you already know it. Hale, say it anyway. Patient, which one? Then came a faint scratching, so soft it might have been the tape degrading, but underneath it, another voice spoke. The same patient's voice, repeating the line but delayed, out of sync. Ria froze, it's echoing him, she whispered. The voices kept layering 2, then 3, then 6, all whispering the same sentence in uneven intervals until the room sounded full of them. When Hale finally said, stop, all the echoes stopped except one. It said you stop. We switched off the tape. The silence afterward felt heavy, alive. That night, Marla swore she heard Diego's voice calling her name through the intercom. We told her it was interference from the generator, but she played us the recording from her walkie anyway. The static came first, then a deep breath, then the whisper. Marla, look in. The next morning, she was gone. Her tool bag was neatly placed by the basement door, the zipper half open. One of the screwdrivers was missing, so was the padlock key to the mirror room hatch. Ria wanted to call the sheriff again. Callum refused. You think he'll believe 2 disappearances in a haunted hospital, he said, will be the ones they blame. We searched anyway. For 6 hours we combed every corridor. Nothing. But when we came back to the basement, the air was freezing again and the light in the mirror room was on. The chair was different now. It had been moved several inches, angled toward the door. And on the seat lay a single object, a mirror fragment no larger than a coin, glinting faintly in the light. When I picked it up, it was wet. I thought it was water until I saw the faint trace of a fingerprint on it, pressed from the inside. We left the building at dusk, silent, cold, and hollow. I slept maybe an hour that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the faint whir of the reel-to-reel turning somewhere in the dark, whispering over and over again in my own voice. You stop. The day after Marla vanished, I stopped checking the clock. Time inside the hospital didn't feel right anymore. It stretched and folded like the warped glass on the walls. Sunlight came through the broken windows in weak, cold bands, and the dust in the air looked like ash hanging in water. Ria stayed, though she didn't sleep. She carried the tape recorder everywhere, as if it could explain something the rest of us were missing. Callum wanted to seal the basement report. Both disappearances and let someone else deal with it. It's a black hole, he said. You keep looking, you get pulled in. He was right, I couldn't stop looking. That afternoon, Ria replayed the tapes again and noticed something new. In the background of Hale's voice, faint but distinct, was a heartbeat, slow, irregular, and definitely not part of the original recording. When she slowed the playback to half speed, the pulse became a whisper. It said our names. We decided to stop listening, but the next morning, Ria found new reels stacked on the table, neatly labeled in the same handwriting, Session 17, Vance. I hadn't seen her write it, and she swore she hadn't either. When we played it, my voice came through the speaker. Not from memory, this was new. Why are you doing this? I heard myself ask. Then another voice, deeper, slower. You're already in here. I ripped the tape out, but the whisper kept going for a few seconds after the reel stopped spinning. That night, the air in the basement turned cold again. Frost spread across the concrete like veins. Callum refused to go down there, so Rhea and I did. We told ourselves we needed to check the hatch, make sure it was still sealed. It was. The door was open a few inches. The light was on again, but dimmer, almost pulsing. When I stepped closer, I saw movement inside, not mine. A figure stood in the far corner, facing the mirrored wall. It looked like a man, tall, shoulders slightly bent, head tilted downward. For a moment I thought it might be Diego or one of the missing crew, until the reflection shifted. The man in the mirror turned his head, but the body didn't. The face that looked back was Diego's, it was mine. I stumbled backward and nearly fell. The reflection smiled, slow and deliberate. Its hand rose to the glass, leaving a fogged print that lingered long after the light flickered out. Rhea grabbed my arm and pulled me up the stairs. We sealed the door again, hammering boards across it until our hands ached. She didn't say a word on the drive back to the motel, but later that night, I heard her in the next room through the thin wall, whispering something over and over in a flat, steady rhythm. When I pressed my ear closer, I realized she was repeating the same 7 words from the tapes. "You're already in here, you're already." I knocked, called her name, no answer. I pushed the door open. Her room was empty. The window was open, curtains fluttering in the cold wind. On the bed sat her tape recorder, still running. The reel spun slowly, whispering something I couldn't make out at first. Then the words sharpened, like a knife sliding through fog. "Look behind you." I turned. For the briefest moment, the reflection in the dark motel window wasn't mine. I went back alone. The police had finished their half-hearted search and boarded the place up, but they left the keys on the hook in the foreman's trailer. It didn't feel like breaking in. It felt like finishing something that had already started. Inside, the air was colder than it should have been. The corridors smelled of dust and rain. Every footstep echoed like it came from somewhere else in the building. I carried only a flashlight, my notebook, and a small cassette recorder, the one that had picked up my voice when I hadn't been speaking. The mirrors had changed. They were no longer coated in soot. They looked clean, almost polished, as if the fire had never touched them. My reflection stared back at me with a patience I didn't remember having. When I moved, it hesitated for a fraction of a second before catching up. I spoke into the recorder, room temperature 42 degrees, no wind, light stable. Then another voice, faint but clear, whispered the same words a moment later. The recorder was in my hand. I should have left then. Instead, I called softly, "Rhea." The light bulb above the chair flickered once. A small sound, like a breath drawn through teeth, came from the mirrors. For an instant, I saw her face reflected among mine, pale and still, as though she were standing on the other side of the glass waiting for me to answer. The flashlight beam rippled as if the air itself had thickened. My reflection smiled before I did. I stepped back toward the door. The latch didn't move. The handle felt warm, almost pulsing, and then released all at once. The light went out. I ran. When I reached the top of the stairs, the wind from the open windows was roaring, though the trees outside were perfectly still. I caught my breath, pressed my recorder to my chest, and hit stop. The tape kept turning for another few seconds before clicking off by itself. Later, when I played it back, the last few seconds weren't my footsteps. They were someone else's, walking toward the microphone, slow and deliberate, until a voice, my own voice, said quietly, "You shouldn't have come back." I don't remember leaving the hospital. One moment I was at the stairwell, the next I was sitting in my car, keys in the ignition, the dashboard clock flashing 12:00 over and over. The recorder lay on the seat beside me. The tape was still spinning, though it had run out of ribbon hours ago. For 2 days I told myself I'd imagined everything, the echoing voices, the lights that moved on their own, the faces behind the glass. I told myself fatigue and mold and bad wiring could explain it all, but the lies didn't hold. Each time I passed a shop window or caught my reflection in a puddle, the world stuttered. The image blinked a moment too late. I tried to record it. The camera never caught it. The delay existed only when I was there to see it. One night I played back all of my tapes, one after another, hoping to find a clue, a pattern, a way to prove I wasn't losing my mind. The reels were full of my notes until the last one. That one was blank for 23 minutes, and then the sound of the chair scraping against the mirrored floor began. After that came a voice, calm, close. Thomas Vance has left the room. Then softly, recording continues. The voice wasn't mine. I drove back to St. Brigid's before dawn. The police tape hung in ribbons across the entrance. I didn't bother with the lights. The corridors remembered me. I could walk them in the dark. The basement hatch was open again. The air was colder than ice, the same thin hum vibrating through the concrete. The chair sat beneath the bulb, and for the first time since we'd found it, the glass was perfectly clear. There were 5 figures in the reflection. 5. They stood behind the chair, Rhea, Diego, Marla, Callum, and someone else. I didn't have to look hard to know the last face was mine. The reflection raised a hand, palm outward, inviting. The light flickered once, twice, then steadied. For a heartbeat, I saw the other side of the mirror not as glass but as water, shifting and alive. I stepped forward until my breath fogged the surface. The reflection smiled, and I heard the faintest echo of my voice, distant but familiar, say, "It's your turn." The bulb flashed out. When the redevelopment crew arrived months later, they found the building sealed again. No mirrors, no chair, only a faint outline on the floor where the chair's legs had stood, and a voice recorded on a forgotten tape in the control room, repeating in a steady loop. Thomas Vance has entered the room. Recording continues. Thank you for watching. Good night.